forgiveness is, and particularly this process, but I think in general, is rewriting a story of what happened to us, what happens for us, what happens through us.
Today's unreasonable human understood the importance of forgiveness from a very young age. But it was not until a great moment of vulnerability that she truly recognized the heart of what it is to forgive. She has taken this wisdom into her work and helped many to transform their lives. She is a forgiveness mentor, Reiki master, and communication guide, and her name is Niki Schmid.
Hi, Niki.
Hi, Erica.
Hi.
So sweet to be with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me on my show. I think when I had a conversation with you not a long time ago, and it came up that you do forgiveness work, I just knew you had to be on the show, because forgiveness for me is such an intrinsically unreasonable behavior to so many people, but it is such an important behavior. So I really am grateful that you're on the show, because I'm really grateful that we get to really go into the subject and talk about it further. But let's begin with you, because obviously the show is about unreasonable humans, and I obviously think you're an unreasonable human, which is why you're on the show. So I wanted to first start with where you were born and raised.
Okay, sure. Well, I was born and raised for my first 25 years of life. Well, the last year's probably not raised anymore, but raised by myself in Vienna, Austria. So I'm originally from there, and now have lived almost more than that time here in the U.S. So,
yeah. What brought you to America?
What brought me to America was my then husband, now husband, and his work at the IT world, in the rising IT world at that time. And I had been an au pair between 17 and 18 in San Francisco, and I've fallen in love with the area and America. And so it was an easy choice for me to come along.
I'm sure.
And come back to the Bay Area.
And so that's where you started, was in the Bay Area?
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
And how long were you there for?
We lived in the Bay Area for about 10 years, had both of our sons there, and then built a house in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and did something that's very contrary and probably very unreasonable, particularly for Austrian standards. Sold the house just 4 years later, bought a sailboat for it, lived on a sailboat for 2 years in the harbor, Santa Cruz and San Diego.
Yeah.
And then after 2 years living in the harbor, we jumped off the Pacific to the Pacific Ocean into the South Pacific and onto New Zealand for a year. The boys were both, they were 4 and 6 when we moved on the boat, and they were 6 and 8 when we did the puddle jump and spent a year on the ocean.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions about that, because I mean, the fact that you lived on a boat, docked boat for 2 years, and then you traveled to New Zealand from America for an entire year with children under the age of 10, is pretty epic.
Yes.
I just want to know this. I'm sure it was hard. That I'm sure we don't even have to ask you, but I'd like to know what were some of the greatest lessons that you learned about, first of all, living on a boat for 2 years, because living on a boat, just a docked boat, must be very interesting. And then traveling on a boat for a year. What were some of the lessons that you took away from that?
Haven't thought about it in a while, but I would say, we weren't actually planning to be docked. So we moved onto the boat already with the thought of leaving. So, and it was great that we got to be there for numerous reasons, to get to know the boat better, to get to know how we live with each other on such a small space together, and kind of slowly cut the umbilical cord, which was great. So I think what comes up first is what I learned. I'm a very social being. I I've get more introverted as I get older, but I'm definitely an extroverted person. I tank up with energy of others. And when we left Santa Cruz area, it was so hard. And then leaving San Diego area was also so hard. And even though I'd moved in obviously over continents before, I kind of decided I'm going to get reclusive and not connect with people anymore because saying goodbye is just too hard. And the time in San Diego, I realized I can't do that. That's not going to make this trip any more enjoyable, if even the opposite, because I'm not going to get to explore other people. And I'm going to cut myself off. I always joked and I said, I kind of shriveled from a raisin from a grape into a raisin. And while it was still a good, fruit, I wasn't my full juiciest self. And so I decided that's not what I'm going to do. And with that, made incredible connections with other people that are out there, and were out there at that time.
Are these people that were docked
on the crew on the sailing? No, they were people from all over the world, which was the
while
beauty.
You were sailing. So is this like explain how you met people while you were sailing on the boat?
Well, so it's even more popular now, and we were just on the brink of with the GPS and autopilots and things like that, where it got easier to do that, even if you weren't a sailor, which I wasn't. I don't even like swimming a whole lot, believe it or not. But yeah, there's a flock that travels across the world with the winds, and it's a community. It's an absolute community, and you meet your people. And we've met some friends, actually one who just recently had birthday, and we're still connected to the hip, even though we're far away from each other. And yeah, so
does this okay? I need to get further details because I'm still. Does this like, so you're on the open ocean and there's a sailboat that comes up next to you? How would you communicate? How would you be in contact with each other?
You're over radio.
Yes.
Over radio. So, and you don't go too close to each other, although at times when the seas are quiet, you can, meet
Wave
each other
across.
or jump into the water together, which we did at times. My older son celebrated his 9th birthday in the Sea of Cortez, jumping in, and we all did. And so, but yeah, that's how you communicate. And then you travel at times together, and then you meet up, or then you don't, and then you meet up again at different, ports or islands, and kind of that. Yeah, it's a traveling caravan, so to speak, that goes with each other. And so that was definitely like the friendships that have been made and the people we have met. And I'm so grateful that I learned not to go against my grain, which I think, if I think about it, and right now in this moment, was one of the first times probably I was like, oh, I can't do that. That would be fear-based of I can't meet people because I have to say goodbye. And then I thought, well, if I don't meet anybody, I can't even say goodbye, so I don't have hellos. So that was that. And then the other thing that I learned, and I will say, many of the things that have me actually sit here with you today were unreasonable because they were brought to me through my husband, through Robert at that time. And he's a very adventurous spirit and always wants to try new things. And we made a good match in that I, when thinking about it and kind of like, getting his persuasive self through me, I was like, okay, yeah, why not? Why do I want to look back and say, I don't want to have a family life on a boat with a timeout, for the security of you going to a job and perceivably coming home every night, which we never know that happens. And I just didn't want to look back. And yes, you can say, well, you went on a boat and you didn't know if you were going to come back from that. But just the idea of saying no to family time and him wanting to be with us, it just, that would have been unreasonable to me.
Yeah.
And so learning to do unreasonable things definitely on the boat and feeling aligned with it, that was something I learned, and that I could actually do more than I thought I was capable of.
Yeah.
And so that definitely was something that I learned on that trip. And that closeness can bring you so close with each other. I mean, it's both, it's double-sided, right? But it just brought us as a family at that time is something that made us that we are today.
Oh, that's so great.
And yeah, definitely shaped the boys and in their own ways. So I'm very grateful we did that.
Yeah, I love that you did that. And it's, sometimes the things that seem the most unreasonable are going to be your greatest gifts in life. They teach you so much. The greatest gifts don't often come without great challenge. You have to go through that to really find the lesson and the wisdom and the gratitude from it, So it's really beautiful. Yeah. I know. So you went. You told me that you went off to New Zealand and then you went back to Vienna, with your kids for 2 years with your ex-husband. I would like to know from that time, that moment in your life, what brought you to finding this work that is the forgiveness work that you do now?
Well, I actually think forgiveness has lived in me my whole life. I just didn't have the word for it.
Well, what is forgiveness to you? Let's start with that. What is your definition of forgiveness? What is forgiveness?
Forgiveness that I have felt all my life in my heart is that there's always more than one story to a story in a situation. And there's always multiple feelings to it, and everybody sees it differently. It's like I often say, it's like an accident, and you have 2 cars, and there's a driver in each car, and then there's 4 people on each side. You'll have at least six different perspectives.
Yeah.
And I always was able to see that and hold that and feel the empathy and the compassion for each party involved. And I didn't quite know what that meant at that time, though. And so my way of holding that would, maybe from the outside world be said, it's naive, or I excuse others, or I'm too gullible, or, things like that. So I kind of tucked it away for a couple of decades and didn't get, I think, hardened, yet kind of didn't feel into that spirit of what forgiveness meant for me. And then after the 2 years in Vienna, actually, that we tried to go back and be with family after 10 years of not having lived there. And we all just missed the ocean way too much, and the American lifestyle in a way, as beautiful as Austria is, but it was landlocked, and that was felt by us. And we had lived too much out of the box for Austrians. And for all of us to connect there again. So we came back here and we came to Southern California. And shortly thereafter, there was a moment that Robert and I were about to separate, but we stayed together and persevered for a few more years, also doing work through an organization that's called Human Awareness Institute, short HI, and they do workshops around love, intimacy, and sexuality. And when we started and embarked on that journey, my heart opened. Both of our hearts really opened. And the learning about these 3 subjects that are beautiful when they're linked together, but they're each their own component. And to learn about that, and particularly around the intimacy and the love that for me, is the foundation is acceptance of love. And that's what I felt as a kid too, like this acceptance of all parties involved. And when we did those workshops, we had a breakthrough. We stayed together for a few more years. And then out of different circumstances, and having been together for 18 years, 27 years at that time, since we were 18, giving each other the permission to live to I like to call it more our blueprint then. And Robert stayed this adventurous, risk-taking person, and that wasn't quite that, not at least not that risk-taking for me anymore. And so we gave each other the freedom. It was amicable and mutual separation, not easy. And really, I will say one of the things that Robert asked me at that time for a few months. He said, "What does Niki want? What does Niki want?" And in the end, having learned the awareness that we did through the high workshops that at that time we also produced here in Southern California. They originated in Northern California and they're actually all around the world, but we produced them here in Southern California. I've learned so much about myself that, and about him and our relationship and our patterns, that it was sort of like, it's time to give each other the freedom to live to our blueprint. And so that was a very potent question. And it was also the question of like, if I've learned what I've learned about myself and about us now, and up to that date, I was determined to break my family's curse of all the women being divorced. All the men were married, and the women, I was like, I'm not going to be that woman. I'm not going to be a divorcee. My children aren't going to be of a divorced family. I was very determined about that. So the times before where we may have, we found a way through that. And then there was this allowing to untether from each other. And then I realized, if I now, it's a little bit like the raisin story. If I now go against my grain of what I know of us, what I want Robert to have, and stay in the adventurous spirit and do all these travels and these, like he's a pilot today, I don't like flying. And then we're holding each other back, and that's not truthful for our children, and they will know that. So I had to come to terms with, like, I can't, is it a family curse anyway? And what if they weren't cursed? What if they did what they needed to do as well? And so that's when, it came to the mutual choice then, what does Niki want? And Niki wanted freedom for both of us to live to our true selves and really cherish, and super grateful for what we have had, including this boat trip and all of that.
Yeah.
Now with that came a lot of emotional work. And I, again, feeling that very early on in life, felt like, oh, I, can see how I need to forgive, him and us, and that was fairly easy. But through one of the things that I felt like I was a little bit, caged, and kind of still had like this, like, oh, it's his fault, which really had to do around the timing of be confined in timing. And then I realized that may have, my story is at least, that may have been the way that he felt loved, that if I was on time, if I would spend time with him, that or time with him rather than with the kids or with someone else, that's a way of feeling loved. So I was like, oh my goodness, yes, that's that. And then I had to point the finger at myself and say, how did I not speak up for myself and say, I love you anyway? And how can we make this where you feel loved and I have more freedom and time? And then I realized I've never forgiven myself for the things that I didn't do, that I knew I was supposed to do. From the inside, I've catered to the outside. And that's when it came to me. It's like, oh, I need to forgive myself. And then that kind of led into meeting my teacher, who was also part of that organization. At that time, I was still producing those workshops. And I met her, Eileen Barker, and she was a former lawyer and then a mediator, and she realized something is still missing in mediation. So she came up with this forgiveness process, and then coaching people. And a few months after this realization, I need to forgive myself. And I still have blame in me, and even blame towards my parents. And it's like, what do I do with that? And there was someone who had created a process around it. And I love that. I'm a structured person. And so that sort of led me to that. And I did her workshop and released so much and realized so much. And then I did her coaching program.
Wonderful. So before we get to, I really want to talk about the process and the phases of the process. But before that, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about, this realization that you had that you needed to forgive yourself first. That leads me on to, I'm sure, a question that many people have, which is, do you need an apology from somebody in order to forgive?
Absolutely not. Because they may not even be here. They may not be even realizing that there's an apology needed because they did what they did, and they may very well be in the mindset and in the heart set of like, that was okay, which it may have been for them. So they may not even realize also the impact that it may have had on us, and feel in their right, so to speak. So we may not get it from them, nor may they be here. Or if they do know, they may not be in a place where they can yet, or where they have their strength to do that. So if I wait for that, I may never, forgive. And so absolutely not.
So forgiveness is really not about anybody else but yourself.
Exactly. And this process that I lead through and that Eileen created and I crafted to my own ways as well, with everything that I read and that I do, and my passions in it, which I'm sure we'll get to later, but is a unilateral. It's beautiful that maybe out of that energy shifts, and it has happened to myself and to many that I worked with, where something shifts and then the other person actually comes towards them and they go like, what? Why are they? What's happening? And it's like, because I have changed. I've changed my perspective. I have, seen them now as a human again, and realize that my story may not be their story. My facts may be different than theirs from their perspective once again, right? And from there where they are in that accident of life, and so it's really
like an energy shift.
It's an energy shift, and then sometimes what comes too is that we actually realize that we've had a doing in this, which is really the nugget of the self-forgiveness, which we sort of omit in the retelling of the story. And then often actually an energy comes from us to say, even if we just write it out to the person who isn't here anymore, to the person that may not want to have contact with us, to say, I'm sorry. That's what I felt when I felt this, like, I can't actually just put this on Robert because I had a partaking in this, and saying, I'm sorry, I didn't speak up for myself. I didn't take care of me so that we can actually chime together.
So interesting, because that's, I think, that's the difficult part. So let's go through the phases of what the forgiveness process is. If you can just explain some of the different phases, how you get yourself to that point, because that's the most difficult point, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I also always say that, forgiveness is, and particularly this process, but I think in general, is rewriting a story of what happened to us, what happens for us, what happens through us. And I, along with many, I think, quickly saw the for, and again, that naive, I'm making everyone good, I'm everybody's excused, which wasn't always the case. But the through is really me, and allowing myself to feel that vulnerability and to tap into, which for me now is strength. And I got this very beautiful quote from a very dear mentor through the Human Awareness Institute. She's a facilitator there. And in a moment where I felt very weak, even though I felt so strong before, and then something was pulled under my feet and I felt so weak, and I said something to her probably on the lines, I'm feeling weak and vulnerable, and she put my chin up as I was crying, and she looked me deep in the eyes and she said, honey, don't you ever forget, vulnerability is your strength. That makes you human and accessible. And I think that's what's happening in the world. We are closing ourselves off from our humanity and being accessible, and we hide behind walls and gates and strict boundaries, which are great, but we make them absolute for the rest of our lives. We don't ever, feel like we can be fluid in them, or often not.
Absolutely.
And so we cave ourselves in.
That vulnerability, I'd like to speak a bit more to that, with vulnerability and forgiveness, because I've really seen that when people put these boundaries up. Like, boundaries are such a word nowadays. Boundaries. But then what I've realized with people who have these just boundaries set up around them, like the stone wall, there's no way for people to come in. There's no way for some form of negotiation or understanding of each other, because at the end of the day, compromise is also needed a lot of the times. And I'm sure in forgiveness work, you know, when you are being vulnerable, you're also compromising yourself to a point. Absolutely. Because you're opening yourself up. Yeah. But you are opening yourself up a lot of the times to things that you don't even know are going to come in, like good things. Right. And so it's such a safety, especially people I've noticed who've been through a lot of trauma or grief. Their boundaries are so rock solid because they're trying to keep themselves safe. And I'm sure it's like that. You see that a lot in forgiveness work. There's this locked up. And then how do they break through that? How do they get to the vulnerability phase?
Well, I want to preface this by, if someone has gone through a very traumatic abuse or something that, you know, really like earth-shattering, forgiveness isn't the first step to go to. You know, you have to really like be so tender with yourself and maybe need to be in those boundaries and in those locked in places, because you need to just really find yourself first. And maybe, you know, one day kind of cut a door into it so that someone can come through the door, you know, or take a brick out after a brick, you know, from the stone wall. So I think that they are at times really, really necessary and healthy. It's to keep them there and to make them for the rest of our lives. So when we have had people come in that we feel, you know, that safety with, and that we talk and we share, then we can open up. And for me, the place is then when someone comes to the place of like, okay, I get stuck around my relationship with my mother or my brother or my ex-husband or ex-wife, and they're willing to not live with that rigidity anymore. And they're missing out on life, or maybe other relationships go to the wayside, or their health does. So that's sort of the first step of like, this doesn't work anymore. This worked for a while, but it doesn't work anymore. And my life is compromised, and I don't want that anymore. I want the relationship with maybe even my children. You know, one of the reasons for me this work is also so important. It's ancestral work and it's future generation work. And that was for me a place of like, that what I thought was a curse in my family is like, well, whose story is that?
Yeah.
And I had to dismantle that and go like, well, I don't want that to be passed on to my children. So that's what had me also do it. So there is that place where then people come and go like, these walls, these gates, these hard boundaries don't work for me anymore. And often they actually created that, once we are through the trauma part of something, or the, you know, the victim and the not even the pity me, but the rightfully going like, but that was not okay. This is unfair. This is unjust, which really, that is what we work with. That's a grievance, and that's grief. And that's grief is an unintegrated notion of something that we lost or someone that we lost. So it all goes hand in hand. And when we come to that place, then we open up and we maybe have a bigger gate, and we take, you know, we take the fence, we take the wall down and we put a fence up where we can see through, you know, it's step by step.
Yeah.
And really for me, it is that we are cultivating, and that is, again, to the degree of our situation, a trust and a safety within ourselves, because we can't rely on the outside. And so once that is established, that trust and that safety, then we actually can be vulnerable with ourselves, because then we aren't relying on that from the outside anymore. Yeah. And so that's when the vulnerability starts to be actually a strength. And we realize, oh, we've been told contrary to social stigmas that vulnerability is weak, or that we don't have it together, or we shouldn't feel those feelings, or certainly not cry by all means. This is like, but that vulnerability really is our strength and connects us. And that brings the intimacy to our lives, the into me you see and into me I see when I get to share that, that fertile ground for what you were just saying. Then the miracles happen and the energy shifts, and we go like, well, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Nothing happened on the outside, inside, right? So that's the vulnerability, but we need the safety and the trust. And I think that's what I feel I provide in my sessions with people, is like establishing that. And that means to not have judgments, and not, we don't know. We even with my children, I don't know what's going on in them, even though they came out of me.
Yeah, of course,
so the judgment is the piece that often gets in the way, our own judgment too. And with that, we don't want to get vulnerable, right? So to create that safe place for them to share and know that I have no judgment over their lives and their behaviors and their actions or non-actions. That's super important, and we need that because often we didn't have that.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I'd like to also ask you, when it comes to, say somebody's listening to this episode and they're trying to find forgiveness within themselves. Maybe they're on the other side. They did something that was not okay on a soul level to themselves, or they did something directly to somebody else. And the person that they've done it to, either the person that they've done it to is not willing to forgive them, or they are finding it hard to forgive themselves. What are some steps that they can take to try and come to a place of forgiveness within themselves?
That's a great question. Well, so again, it's not hinged on the apology. It's really hinged on letting ourselves off the hook, which, on the contrary side just of that is like, often we feel like if we forgive someone, we let them off the hook of we're condoning their, behavior, and we're letting them get away with something and the behavior that was not okay.
And almost giving something else away. I'm sure a lot of people feel that, well, you're giving something else away.
Right, exactly. And really for me, forgiveness is forgiving. Giving for me to come off that place where I hold myself not even responsible, but on the hook. It's the responsibility actually is a different thing, because it needs the tender care of my own being to hold myself. And often these forgiveness grievance stories, it's many of us know these days, is they stem from very young on. They're often hinged to a dignity violation that was happening to us, or that we did to someone else, whether that was maliciously or unconsciously or out of circumstances, and again, ancestral patterns and all of that. And then when that dignity violation happens, then a need isn't met, that we needed to feel like we belong, we're safe, we can trust that person. So then we look for that need and it's not being met. And then we get lost and we don't have a roadmap for that. And then we live contrary to our blueprint once again, and do things to keep harmony, keep peace, to find safety, to blame it on us that we were at fault, which we often do as children. And so then that puts emotion or feelings into motion, like energy into motion, right? And then it gets all confused and convoluted, and then we build story upon story upon story. We come upon the same things that, the often same partners, or the opposite partners that we, chose from our parents, but it comes really, the problems kind of show up in the same way. And so it's really letting ourselves off the hook and tending to ourselves, to that need that wasn't met when we were young. and to learn that through the process as well in the inner child work, and which I'm beautiful mentor of mine is Ann Watts, who's also facilitator in the high workshops, and I just adore that woman and the way that she teaches it, and over the last 12 years learned so much from her, and that tending, and that it's never too late to have a happy childhood, and we can that reparenting of ourselves, and often not to the fault of our parents, often at the fault of our parents, but it's that place of letting ourselves off the hook and not judging ourselves anymore, and playing little, because then we go into the victim, and we don't show up in our real blossoming self, and because we still hold ourselves accountable but not responsible. And that's sort of like it's both, but it's a fine line, right? To blame ourselves and shame ourselves for it, versus to say, I've done something that wasn't okay, that was wrong, like Brene Brown, I'm sure you know that saying, I'm not a bad person, I did something bad. So that's that difference, and letting ourselves off the hook on that.
It's so interesting, because if you think about it, that's really like the foundation, I guess, of forgiveness. One of the foundations of finding forgiveness within yourself and others is that line that you said, when your needs have not been met. If you think about the need for forgiveness within yourself for somebody else, it means even the person who has done something to harm somebody else, that person has had a need that has not been met at some time in their lives. And because of that, they have harmed somebody else. And then that person who has been harmed has lost their dignity. And so their needs have not been met. So if you can find a place where a person's needs can be met, there is so much possibility for repair. And I think that's maybe what is really something that is not being met in this world, right?
It's not taught anywhere. It's the othering. I call it the othering. The forgetting that the other one is a human being as well. And again, the forgiveness isn't about forgiving the acts and the bad behaviors. And it's not even excusing that, they didn't have a good childhood, or, they didn't. It's the seeing of the hurt and the pain that lives in them, and that clashed with ours, and that was sort of met. And often I believe in karma, and I believe that, we do meet each other to learn from each other, and to then come and, if someone can forgive these atrocities of war victims, and there's books about World War II victims that can forgive their perpetrators, and there's people who forgive the murderers of their children, and there's if they can forgive, to not at least learn how to, in maybe our nevertheless harsh feelings and harsh upbringings, and we will stay then harsh and hard and always other. And that is not taught anywhere, and that is what's going on, quite frankly, right now, right? It's like absolutely. That othering and the taking the sides, and rather than sitting down. And in the book Dignity by Donna Hicks, she talks so amazingly about sitting down with the victim and the perpetrator and hearing each other's stories. And we may not agree, and yet we can listen, and we can say, okay, I can forgive from this point on. I'm not holding on to that anymore, because who actually suffers is then the one, the victim.
I was going to say, if you're holding on to that, right? If you're holding on, if you cannot forgive somebody, they're not losing anything. You're the one who's losing something, because you are giving that energy away. You're holding that resentment, that anger, that shame, that whatever. And the moment you can find the forgiveness in yourself, you are finding you're bringing your power back.
Yes, exactly. That's it. Right? It's an empowering process, because when we stay in that blame and shame of the other or ourselves, that it's actually interesting because for me, shame and guilt are two different things, and they're often thrown into the same pot. Which shame is something that we take on. It's something from the outside. Either it was given to us by a comment of someone who didn't even mean it to be shaming. It could have been.
Yeah.
Often those comments are from parents who want to have their children thrive, and they say something in order to bring them up that actually puts them down, right? So then we shame ourselves that we don't live up to that, or that we're this kind of person. And then we live, again, not to our blueprint. We get to shrivel up as a raisin. We're still a human being, but we're not as juicy and as full and as plump and as grown. And then we live against us, and it's the guilt that we can work with. That's what I work with people in the process. It's not the shame, as Anne Watts likes to say. The shame stays outside. That's not ours. You know, we don't bring that in anymore. It's the guilt. That's the person of, I did something wrong. I did something bad.
Or something happened to me and I feel bad for it.
Exactly. But I am not a bad person because of that. Yeah. And that's the shame. And so if we convert that, if we then see it's not personal, it's out of someone else's story. Yeah. And there's this saying, you know, when we point a finger at someone, 3 point back. So who's got the work to do, you know? Yeah, that's true. And then what did we make it mean about ourselves? So if we go into that, and that's what the process starts with, that cerebral, which this is where we start. We have this amazing brain, right? And we want to figure it out. So we go into that. And then you come into more creative, into a more empowered space. So I always say we're rewriting a victim story to a creator story. And what's important is what's in the middle, the through. Where have you not been tended to? Where have the others not been able to out of their circumstances? And how can I repair that within myself? And with the inner child work comes that place that, you know, many do, and we go and there's meditations and there's a process on how to be with our younger one. And I find it very humorous at times when you know, when you do repair that relationship, and then in this world here, we fall back into one of those small places and the doubt, and then often I go to my young one, but she doesn't need the healing anymore. She just slaps me in the face and says, what the F? Yeah. You said that wasn't us anymore. Yeah. You said you were confident. You said you were, you know, you told me that's who I am, that I can do more, that I'm not, you know, so please live to that, what you have taught me. So I find it at times very humorous when I go back to my younger child, that she goes like, no. It's not me anymore. This is on you now. So, and that is empowering, and that brings creativity, that brings that, you know, blows us up again as that raisin, and we get soaked.
Yeah, and you get soaked. So as children, when it comes to children and forgiveness, do children, so say you're a parent listening, and you know, parent guilt is a real thing, is because I have a feeling that a lot of parents don't apologize to their children because they assume that their child is just going to forget if they don't say sorry. If they just leave the situation and they don't bring it up again, it's forgotten. But we know, no, it's not forgotten. All of this stuff stays. So what is the importance of teaching your children about forgiveness when it comes to not only you apologizing to your children, but really teaching your children the vulnerability of forgiving themselves? Because what is the importance of that?
Well, it's so true, because if we don't apologize, that's the stacking starts, right? We keep score, we either for the other or for ourselves. And again, through the Human Awareness Institute workshops, got taught, and through nonviolent communication and many other, again, books that I love to read, and learning about this, about conscious language, et cetera, learning different communication styles. Because I think one of the things that happens is that we apologize too quickly, in a way that we don't see if the other person is available for that, because they may still be hurt. So for me, and one of the things that we use in our household, and my boys were 12 and 15 when Robert and I started these workshops and have incorporated these communication tools in our daily lives. One of the things, if it comes to that, is to first, we have to realize we, again, did something without shaming ourselves.
Yes.
That wasn't okay. It was maybe even necessary, but how it came across to the other and the impact that it had on the other wasn't okay. And it came out of our own, maybe we had a bad day, or, you know, our stacking of something, right? And so the thing that happened may have actually been necessary, but it was the way that it came across to the other person and the impact that it had on them, possibly. And so for me, it's the apology is really to get back into my integrity, to say, listen, how this happened isn't okay, and how I said it or what I said isn't okay. But what needs to happen is that we check in with our child and say, I would like to offer you an apology about, and my son taught me that, you know, use the theme of what it is. Is it about the dishes that haven't been done, or the, you know, breaking the vase, you know, and I have an apology about, you know, and the dishes, and then the other person can say, I'm open to hear that, or I'm still upset of how you yelled at me, I can't hear your apology. And then it can't come in, right? We think we've apologized, and then it goes like, well, I said apology, you know, and I said sorry, and they go like, yeah, but it didn't really land with me.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And so then if there's a yes, then you know, put that in. It may even for the other person not be something that they will go and need it, you know. And I was like, well, that was quite all right. You're right. I didn't do the dishes because you told me to, and I didn't do them. You know, why are you apologizing to me? I should apologize to you. But it really is for the person who feels like they're out of integrity with what they did or how they said it. So then the person that's being apologized to, all they say when they were open is thank you. They're not excusing it. They're not saying, oh, it wasn't really necessary, it didn't bother me, or no, they say thank you for you wanting to be back in love with me, and in integrity, and noticing that something was off.
Yeah, that's really big, because if you think about, because I'm sure when people heard, oh, well, forgiveness is about you and you only, that puts a lot of people, that's, oh, well, then why should I ever say sorry? Because if it's about you and you've got to find the forgiveness in you, there's no need for me to say sorry. I'm sure many people would think that.
Possibly,
but what you've just said about integrity, and like, it's about you looking at yourself and saying, am I integrity with myself?
Right. And then the other thing I just want to say is like, there could be that the other person says, no, I'm not available right now for that. I'm still hurt. And then you make a plan to meet each other and say, can we meet in an hour and see how you're then, you know? And then, I mean, we usually have the rule, don't take it more than 3 times. You know, at some point you got to be open and willing. And then also you say the thank you. And then often what's very beautiful is after a period of time, you know, shortly, or we have it now so oiled within our household that it will be like, well, would you like to hear the other side? You know, are you curious of what happened for me? Either the one that receives the apology or the one who, you know, apologizes, because often the one that it may not actually hit them and say, I'm actually curious what happened for you. Why did you come with this tone, and why did you throw that at me? And, you know, why couldn't you say that nicer? And then you go like, well, listen, this and that happened during the day. And I was just like, and that just put me over the top, and that there's no excuse around that. And this is what happened, so that we actually, and that's the intimacy, right?
Yes.
The into me you see, into me I see, so that we can actually be in reciprocity with each other. And that is like, that's the place of like where an apology really lands. But it can't be a dialogue, and it needs consent, and it needs to be where the other one, and it really takes often a really deep listening to go like, am I clear for you to give me that apology? Because if I'm not, I could slash back. Right.
Yeah.
And so then there's a whole snowball effect.
It takes the person who wants to apologize to understand that this apology is not about them.
No.
It's not about them like apologizing, they have to understand that they want to do that, but they have to give the person that they're apologizing to the space to allow that apology in.
Exactly.
Because otherwise it's just, and people notice that, they sense it. And that's why so many times I've seen it in my own life, and I'm sure, you know, many people notice this in their own lives, where somebody has come to you to apologize and the person, you're just not ready.
Right. You're not ready, or you don't see the point in it, or
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like,
And the
or you shrug it off, and then the person who wants to apologize goes like, "Well,
and then they never do
now,
yeah,
and now you're turning me away. Here I come remorsefully, and it doesn't even mean anything to you." So you know, there's that, and that's the communication too that I teach. Is like it's so important, and with that we can actually avoid the stacking of stories. And so, you know, it's that's the piece. And again, we don't unfortunately learn it most of the time to have that way of having a consensus and consent with each other in sharing anything, you know. Nothing against dialogue, but it's the same with an acknowledgement or an appreciation. That can't just be like, oh, I'm appreciative about something about you. We may not be open for that.
And I guess a person might never be open to it. So if you're wanting to apologize, once again, it comes back to that. If you're wanting to apologize to somebody and they're not prepared, they don't want you to apologize, they're not ready for that, you can still find that forgiveness, and you can still find that apology within yourself. You can still write a letter to them without even giving it to them.
Exactly.
Because you can still have because the energy, it's the intention, right, behind all of it.
Well, and that's really, you know, if it comes really to that place, if it is so big, you know, and that the apology is not accepted from the other person and they never want it, then it is for me to look in, like, what was the impact? Where's the tending to me? What is actually happening in me that I am now not able to receive that, you know, give that apology and receive the okay from the other person. And then it's the inner work, you know, and that's the bigger conversation than in the forgiveness world. But definitely the apology cannot come from like, oh, with that, it's, you know, I'm just going to make it okay again. You know, it's like, it has to be a really like the truth from within to want to be connected to this person. And to be okay. And then acceptance and love, we may not like it. I always say acceptance is the first stage of love.
Yeah.
But liking something is actually higher than love, because you can love something, but you may not like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then to have that and say, okay, I need to accept this. I need to love this, and I need to be okay with that person not wanting that. And how can I repair that within myself so that I don't actually suffer? Because the other one obviously doesn't. They don't even want to have an apology, or they may, but you know, that's their work. That's not for me to do that then with them.
Yeah, so. I love this. I've loved this conversation. I could go on and on with you, but we need to end up. But I just want to have a few takeaways. Just to we've unpacked a lot of stuff. So what I've heard in this conversation, which feels really important, and you let me know if there's anything we want to add in here, that forgiveness and an apology are not the same thing. So if you have done wrong to somebody, or if you have done, you know, if you are to blame for something, an apology is something that you should work towards.
You can
work towards, but it doesn't mean that person is necessarily going to forgive you. You need to find the forgiveness within yourself. Otherwise, that's what's going to eat at you. And similarly, if you have had something done wrong to you, you have to find it in yourself, to find the forgiveness within yourself, because that person might never apologize. And even if they do apologize, you have to find that forgiveness in yourself, because otherwise it's just going to come up again. It's going to keep coming up.
It's going to keep coming up. And another person may bring me that same lesson.
Yeah.
You know, as a friend of mine has created an acronym that I really like. It's just another fucking growth opportunity, which we like lovingly call an AFGO. You know, it's another AFGO. You know, when that stimulus happens, when something happens, and even if someone else has apologized, that doesn't mean that I haven't done my work. You know.
Yes.
So very true.
And then also knowing, so forgiveness, the steps, sort of the phases of forgiveness.
But we start with, like you just said, cerebrally with the, I always like to call it, we connect our beautiful mind with our tender heart and our intuitive gut. So that's really the three steps, the
Yes.
2, 4, from, through.
2, 4, through.
Through, yeah.
Yeah.
And it starts off cerebrally, because again, that's what we do as human beings. We want to figure it out. We realize we have a story. That's our perspective. And then that grievance story gets started to be rewritten. And then we drop into the body first. We go like, where are those feelings? Where are those? Because the feelings and the emotions are usually stuck somewhere with us in the body. And so there's also the emotion code and the body code, which is a releasing of that. And I'm going to do a training around that because they get stuck. So where are they? And often those are the places actually that we have an ache at, or that, we can, I don't know if you know about Louise Hay, but so, where is it? Is it the right side? What is it? What is that piece of my body telling me? Or what is that, if that emotion, that feeling is stuck in there, what is it telling me? And then we create a safe place in the body, which is the whole point that we didn't have when we were a kid. So to connect the safe place with the place that doesn't feel safe, right? So we drop into the body, and then we go into the feeling part of like, what is that vulnerability? Where is that inner child? Where is that healing? Where is the tending to that hasn't been tended to? And we can go back to. And then there's that shift perspective, because all of a sudden we see the others as humans. We don't other anymore. We don't blame out anymore. We take that responsibility, and we realize what we've made it mean about us, and that is actually not the truth about us. And that's where I also say it's like the goal path meets the soul path, where the soul often, and I heard something just recently when I was in Austria where a psychiatrist said, often our body aches and we wonder why, and it's the soul talking to the body going like, can you tell them? I can't get through to them. Please tell them something is off. So the soul speaks to us through our body. And so then we come to the other side, and with the shift perspective, we actually get to harvest the gifts and the gratitude and the seeing like this happened for us and who we are today. And if we really live to our true self, then we find our essence. And out of something possibly very tragic, we are this excellent human being. So that's sort of the process. And then we end with a ritual and a ceremony, because I love that. And I don't feel like that's attended enough in our society as well, that we actually really conclude something and bring it to completion. And so then there's that.
I want to just I've got one last question. How long do these processes sometimes take? How long does the forgiveness process, is this something that people can do? How long?
So by design, by Eileen Barker, it's a 12-step process, which has nothing to do with 12 steps. It just happens to be that's it. Integration and ritual is part of that. And it really depends on the willingness and the readability of the person. So I always say it's a great skeleton for us. And some people get through it in, even maybe 8 sessions, because we can pull things together and they're right there and it's clear to them and it works really fast. And some may have never worked with their emotions and their vulnerability and what that means and come to it the first time, right? And we take longer, and then life happens in between, which serendipitously always brings something that, feeds into that. So then there's that. So some people I've worked with, over a year with, and it's usually every week, every other week. Life happens too. It can be on Zoom or in person. And so it's really, but I would say anywhere between 8 and 15 sessions, you're through it.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean it's done, because as one of my sweet colleagues and friend in the forgiveness world says, forgiveness is a lifestyle. Once you've learned how to do that and what to do, you don't want to have 12 steps anymore. And you will come back to those, because it's always another fucking growth opportunity to grow into something bigger. And then life will say, so how about now? Are you ready for this? And are you are prepared? I know you are prepared. Do you know you are prepared? So it really is then something that they can use as their own modality and mix it with other things. And, obviously meditation is in there and the slowing down and all of that. And so it's very compatible with many other modalities. So that's what it is. It's
and it's very I would like to just say this, that forgiveness is not a weakness. So many people, like when you were young, you were seen as,
naive
and gullible,
good-hearted.
But somebody
people aren't that good.
But somebody who can genuinely forgive others and themselves is a very strong person, because it takes a lot. I think having self-shame and guilt and tempering everything down is actually so much easier.
Well, really, we all strive for a peaceful world, and what it does, it brings that inner peace. I call it also forgiveness from within, bringing peace. We want a peaceful world. So you are, in a way, a peaceful warrior that, puts yourself out there and do something that society, puts it either into a religious act or something that weakens us because we are giving something to another person that we shouldn't. We should hold on to that.
I have a great example of this, of forgiveness when it comes to the world, because the world is an interesting place and forgiveness is few and far between. But so I'm from South Africa, and when Nelson Mandela was first released from prison, nobody knew what was going to happen. There were people ready to go to war for him, and he created something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it was the most powerful. I still remember watching this on TV. So what he did, if people don't know what it is that people who were responsible for the apartheid era, they came in front of a board of members, of people from various backgrounds, and it was broadcast on TV, and they admitted to all the atrocities that they had done throughout the apartheid era, and they were forgiven for these atrocities. Instead of, Nelson Mandela was thrown into jail for over 2 decades, and here he created this Truth and Reconciliation Commission to change. And that is why South Africa did not go into a war, because it was such a different way of seeing things. He had so much forgiveness for others and for himself. It was just mind-blowing to watch on TV, thinking, this is such a different way of doing things. And it really proved that was empowering, the forgiveness that the nation showed to these people who had done these horrible things. It wasn't about those people who had done the horrible things. It was about them reclaiming their power, and that's what they did. They reclaimed some sense of dignity in that forgiveness.
I was just going to say, that's what really, for me, it is. It's the reclaiming of our own dignity. And to be witnessed in that. And to be witnessed by a whole country by that. I just got the chills and just the realization of what he's such a great teacher for me. I've read his books, and Desmond Tutu, and there's plenty of them that they can officially be an example for that. For me, that gives hope that if they can do that, if someone can lead that in that way, then who am I to say I can't do that? So it's possible. Exactly. So I'm so grateful for him to show the world of how it can be done.
Me too.
And I can't even fathom what that must have felt like for you. It's like,
because I was young. I was young.
No wonder then forgiveness kind of pulled on you when I said that to you.
Probably.
Because you've lived in it as a country. So
really, it was really incredible. Niki, I've loved this conversation. We could go on and on. I think forgiveness is such a deep, broad, complicated subject, and I just love the work that you're doing. It is so profound and important, and I have learned so much from you, and I'm definitely, there's a lot that has settled in with me about about forgiveness. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And I have no doubt that this is going to really resonate with a lot of people. I would like to finish the conversation with my 3 unreasonable questions.
Please.
All right.
By now I know that they come. Surprise me.
Yes. So my first unreasonable question for you, Niki, is what is your greatest moment of vulnerability?
Ooh. Yeah, the realization that I would do wrong to my children if I live by a story that I am keeping strong, which really would be weak, this family curse, and to do what I never wanted to do and make that realization I can shelter them by thinking what is right for them if it's not right for me. And so to say and let go of that 27-year relationship that I was holding on so strong with, and to say to Robert that, yeah, I would like to separate. That was really one of the, yeah, that's what comes to my heart right now. And I just feel also in this moment, actually, that there's still something to uncover for me in there, which is always like, oh, okay, what's that path that's coming up right now, you know? That so thank you for that question.
Pleasure. Thank you for such an honest answer. I appreciate it. My second unreasonable question is, what brings you the most joy?
When someone else, and through being together, it doesn't even have to be the work, or, you know, that's obviously what we're talking about. When we can reflect with one another, and when someone else or I get to actually tap into something that I didn't even know, or they didn't even know was there yet. And for me, it's that, when I said earlier, the beautiful mind and the tender heart and the intuitive gut, and when that shoots down into Mother Earth and connects to the roots, and that wisdom of our amazing planet that knows how to regulate, and then it shoots up and goes out into the space of the universal wisdom and the divinity and God, or whatever one calls it. When that is in alignment, and I felt it a few times in my life, so I call it like a light rod that comes through. When I get to witness that in someone, or I feel it myself, like that ignites joy in me. That yeah, it's like, yes, that's who I am, that's who you are, and that essence. So that's what comes to mind and heart right now. There's many other things that bring joy, but that one is the one that gives me joy for the world.
That's a big one. My final question is, Niki, what is your definition of an unreasonable human?
Well, as we said the other day, you can answer this two-folded, right? What comes to me in this moment is what I was just sharing. When we feel that rod through us, when we feel our essence, when we feel our truth, even though for someone else it may seem totally unreasonable or crazy, or how could we? When we work against that, that's when I feel like we become the unreasonable in the unreasonable. So it's really, it's a dichotomy a little bit, you know, because what is unreasonable in the first place, it is to be unreasonable, and then it's unreasonable to be reasonable against my unreasonability, if that makes sense.
Yes, I love that.
So, you know, that place,
yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Niki. It's been such a great conversation. I'm probably going to have you back one day when we can chat further about
I would
more
love it.
forgiveness, because it's a big subject when it comes to being unreasonable. Forgiveness of others and forgiveness of ourselves is very, very tied into living our truth and our authenticity, and that's what being unreasonable is. So thank you so much, Niki. I've really loved it.
What a blessing and what joy brought me to have this conversation with you. I appreciate you, Erica, and bringing it out into the world. Our unreasonability.
Thank you so
New
much.
word.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Unreasonable Humans. If you would like to contact Niki, you can email her at iamlove1968@gmail.com. Thanks so much for joining me. Please follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and remember that a great rating goes a very long way to support the show. Until the next one, bye.